Hello, dear. It's Rose. Let me tell you something. Nothing in this life prepares you for the sound of your own child's rejection. It doesn't come with thunder or screams. It's quiet, sharp, and final. Like a door closing behind you when you thought you still had a key. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I bought the ticket. A one-way flight. No announcement. No calls. I just went. I missed my son. I missed how we used to be. I missed hearing Mom said, with something softer than obligation. So I packed a small bag, bought a tin of his favorite cookies from the Polish bakery on 7th, and I flew to see him. My boy, my only child. The cab from the airport dropped me in front of his building, a sleek gray thing with mirrored windows and no soul. It looked like something that didn't want visitors, but still, I rang the buzzer. Yeah? His voice came through, casual and distracted. It's me, I said gently. It's Mom. There was a pause, a long one. Then, wait, what? You're here? Then, I just thought I'd surprise you. I wanted to see you. Another pause. Then came the words I'll never forget, not even if I live another 30 years. Who invited you? Silence. Then, quieter. Mom, you can't just show up like this. Seriously, what are you doing here? I felt it then. In my chest, a kind of slow collapse. Like a chair giving way under you. I could hear laughter in the background, glasses clinking. Company? Maybe colleagues? Maybe friends I'd never met. It didn't matter. I wasn't part of that world. I just wanted to see you, I said. I thought we could have dinner. Look, he said, sighing. This isn't a good time. I'm in the middle of something. You should have called. Then the buzzer went dead. I stood there for a long moment, hand still hovering near the intercom. The city swirled around me, horns, wind, distant shouting. But inside me, nothing. Just a numb sort of quiet. I turned slowly, walked back to the curb. My bag felt heavier than it had an hour ago. The tin of cookies pressed against my ribs like a stone. I didn't cry. Not yet. That came later. I just left. I found a bench 3 blocks down and sat there trying to remember if I had done something wrong, if I had missed a sign, if I had become one of those mothers who didn't know when to let go. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like being erased. And in that moment, as the sky darkened and the wind picked up and not a single car slowed down for an old woman sitting with her son's rejection still echoing in her ears, I knew something had changed. Not in him, in me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because what I did next, that quiet choice in the middle of a loud city, was the beginning of everything. I booked a room at a modest little inn about 15 minutes from his apartment. Nothing fancy. Floral wallpaper, a queen bed with too many pillows, and a lamp that flickered when I turned it on. But it was clean. It was quiet. And it was mine, if only for a night. That first evening, I didn't sleep much. I sat on the edge of the bed with the cookies unopened in my lap. Every so often, I'd run my fingers over the lid, tracing the red script. Ciastka domove, homemade cookies. Funny, isn't it? How something so simple can feel like a lifeline. Or a weapon. I stared at my reflection in the mirror across the room. Silver hair frizzed from the flight, lipstick long faded, eyes like two dark questions. When did I become someone who needed to be invited? I kept replaying his voice, that sharp edge. Who invited you? The next morning, I tried to act normal. I got dressed, fixed my hair, even put on earrings. The little gold hoops he once bought me for Christmas back when he still called me Mama. I told myself maybe he'd wake up and realize. Maybe he'd call. But the phone stayed silent. By noon, I was out walking, trying to convince myself to enjoy the city. Window shopping, people watching, pretending I was just another tourist. But then I passed a bakery with tiny tarts in the window and thought he loved lemon curd as a boy. I almost went in to buy one. Almost. I kept walking. I ended up in a little park near the river, the kind with too many pigeons and not enough shade. I sat on a bench with a coffee that tasted like burnt regret and watched a young mother chase after her toddler. He was laughing, arms out like he could fly. I smiled at them, but inside, I was sinking. You know, no one warns you that motherhood doesn't end. They tell you about sleepless nights and teenage tantrums, but not about this. Not about watching your child grow into someone you don't recognize, someone who can shut a door and not look back. I remember when he was 10 and his goldfish died. He cried so hard I thought something inside him had broken. We buried that fish in a shoebox under the maple tree, and he made me say a little prayer over it. And that night, he asked me, "Will you always be here, Mama?" And I said, "Always. Even if you forget I'm here, I'll be somewhere nearby." I hadn't thought about that in years, but sitting there in that park, watching that little boy with his mother, it all came rushing back. And I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if showing up was selfish, or if not showing up for all these years was worse. Because the truth is, I had kept my distance. After his wedding, things got complicated. His wife didn't take to me, polite but cold. Our phone calls grew shorter. Holidays became busy weekends. Grandkids? I hadn't seen them in person in over a year, just photos, just curated, careful, sent through group text with hearts and emojis like that counted as love. And maybe I let it happen. Maybe I pulled away to avoid the sting. But this rejection on the sidewalk, this was a different kind of cold. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a ghost walking through a life I helped build. That somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being a mother and started being a memory. Back at the inn that night, I opened the cookie tin. I took one out and held it for a long while before taking a bite. It was soft, but it didn't taste like home. It tasted like loss. I checked my phone one last time. No message, no call. And that's when I made the decision. Not out of spite, not revenge, out of self respect. I wasn't going to beg my way back into his life, but I was going to find out why he had locked me out in the first place. And I knew exactly where to start. I began with her, Melissa, my daughter in law. She was always polite, polished. The kind of woman who never forgets to send a thank you note, but signs it with a heart so tight it looks like a noose. I'd tried, Lord knows I tried. Welcomed her in, bought her that blue scarf she admired in the shop window, offered her my mother's silver set when they married. She said all the right things in response, but her eyes always said something else. So when my son stopped calling so much, when I was slowly uninvited from family dinners and birthdays became text messages instead of visits, I told myself she's just busy. They're building a life. Don't take it personally, Rose. But you know what I've learned? When someone tells you not to take something personally, it's because they already did. The next morning, I found myself outside their condo building again. Not to buzz up, no, that was done, but just to look. I stood across the street with my coat pulled tight and watched the lobby. And I saw her, Melissa, in black workout leggings and a blazer, like a business executive trying to jog her conscience. She was laughing with another woman, holding a green smoothie and tossing her hair like she was in a commercial. Confident, effortless, untouched by guilt. But that's not what caught me. It was the stroller, pushed by a nanny, my grandson, Henry. I hadn't even known they had hired help. Hadn't been told that a stranger now stood where a grandmother could have been. I watched the nanny rock him gently, and then Melissa glanced over. Not at me, no, she didn't see me across the street, but at him. Her smile faded. She looked annoyed, like even his cries were a nuisance in her curated world. That's when something shifted inside me. A cold little key turning in a lock I didn't know I had. I walked straight to the coffee shop a few doors down and sat by the window. I pulled out my phone and opened the group text they'd started a year ago. The one where photos were shared, birthday wishes were posted, and polite updates filtered through filters. And I scrolled back through a year of polite exclusion, and I saw it. The pattern. Every photo from a birthday party, I hadn't been there. Every time they mentioned thanks to everyone who came, I hadn't been invited. Dozens of events, no call, no text, no mention. And not once had my son said a word. I stared at my own replies. Thumbs up, little hearts. He's getting so big. Like I was a distant relative watching someone else's life from 1,000 miles away. And that's when the pieces began to click. It wasn't that I'd pulled away. It was that I'd been gently pushed nudged, maneuvered out of the center and into the wings. And the person doing the nudging had manicured nails and a perfect smile and no intention of sharing the stage. Melissa didn't want me around. And my son, he let her get what she wanted. That night, I made a list. Old habit, pen and paper. Left column, the last time I saw them. Right column, the last time they saw me, truly saw me. The dates didn't match. The moments were all one sided. And near the bottom of the page, I wrote one small, bitter truth. He's not lost. He's just comfortable. They both are. And I was the piece that didn't fit the decor anymore. Not sleek enough, not quiet enough, not curated for company. But here's the thing, I raised that boy. I kept his secrets, paid for his braces, sat through every school play and flu season and heartbreak, and I did it with love, not obligation. So, no, I wasn't going to beg, but I was going to be seen, one way or another. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I picked up the phone. Not to call them, but to call my lawyer. His name was Alan, my lawyer. We hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, not since George passed and I had to update the will. Back then, I remembered feeling overwhelmed by the paperwork, the polite pity in Alan's voice as he explained how a widow should simplify things. But this time, when he picked up and said, "Rose, is everything all right?" I didn't shrink. "No, Alan, but I think I'm ready to stop pretending it is." There was a pause. Then the quiet sound of a chair creaking. "Tell me everything." So I did. Not all at once, not with fire, but slowly, like you unwrap something precious and bruised. I told him about the flight, the cold welcome, the silence, the ghosting, the way my place in my own family had been whittled down to a name in a group text. I told him about the trust fund I had once started for Henry, my grandson, the one I'd never seen in person past his third birthday. I told him about the gifts that were never acknowledged, the money that was helpful, but never enough to earn me a seat at the table. And finally, I told him about the feeling, that hollow echo in your chest when you realize you've become inconvenient. An old photograph shuffled to the back of the drawer. Alan didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked one question. "Do you want to disappear quietly, Rose? Or do you want your voice to ring?" I looked at the cookie tin on my nightstand. Half empty now. The rest of the cookies had gone stale. And I whispered, "I want to ring, Alan, loud and clear." The next day, he sent me a draft letter. Not cruel, not dramatic, but firm. A full cessation of financial support. I'd been paying their phone plans, their grocery deliveries. I'd even contributed to that condo. Not that they ever told anyone. Alan reminded me of just how much was in my name, just how many strings I'd held behind the scenes. They thought I had faded into the background, but my fingerprints were everywhere. By the end of that week, the documents were sent. Registered mail, no escaping it. The day after the letter arrived, my phone rang for the first time in weeks. It was him, Jason, my son. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. His voice came through the receiver like a half-forgotten song. Soft, uncertain, almost sheepish. "Hey, Mom, I got something from a lawyer. Can we talk? Call me when you can." I didn't. 2 hours later, a text from Melissa. "We need to clarify something. This feels like a misunderstanding." Of course it does. Because when you've silenced someone long enough, the sound of them speaking again feels like violence. 3 days passed. And then came the knock. I was back home by then, back in my little house with the ivy creeping up the porch railings and the kettle always whistling a second too long. I opened the door to find them both on my steps. Jason looked tired, pale in that way that only guilt makes a man look. Melissa? She looked perfect, as always. Not a hair out of place, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," Jason began, "why didn't you tell us you were coming?" "I did," I said. "I told you just now. I came because I missed you." There was a long pause. Melissa folded her arms. "It's just, you really put us in an awkward position, Rose. You caught us off guard." "Awkward," I said softly. "That's one word for it, but I was never trying to embarrass you." I stepped aside. "Let them in." I wanted this on my turf, in my space, where the walls remembered who I used to be. Jason sat on the edge of the sofa. Melissa stayed standing, like the floor might stain her. So, he said carefully, about the letter? I nodded. Yes, that letter means the bank is closed. Melissa's eyes narrowed. That's incredibly unfair. We've always included you in our lives. I turned slowly to her. No, dear. You've included me when it was convenient. You've curated me. Quiet mother, polite grandmother, no opinion, no mess. The kind who wires money and then quietly fades away. That's the version you wanted. Jason flinched. I kept going. You didn't even introduce me to my newest grandson. You never invited me to Henry's recital. You left me standing on the street like a stranger. Melissa opened her mouth, closed it. Jason said, It's been a hard year. We've been stressed. I held up my hand. I buried my husband. I downsized my life. I started cooking for one. And I still remembered your birthday, your children's birthdays. And I didn't forget how to knock on a door and say, Hi, Mom. Silence stretched between us. Then Melissa snapped. You're being emotional. We're not villains, Rose. We're just trying to maintain healthy boundaries. I stared at her for a long time. Then I said the quiet thing, the sharp thing. No, dear. You're not setting boundaries. You're building walls and locking the doors behind me. That's not family. That's exile. She looked stunned. Jason stood up slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom, are you saying you don't want to be part of our lives? I blinked. No, sweetheart. I'm saying I want to be part of mine again. I showed them the door. Not angrily, not cruelly, just firmly, with the same quiet grace they had used to phase me out. And as they walked back to their car, him glancing over his shoulder, her texting before she'd even reached the driveway, I felt something strange begin to rise in my chest. Something that felt for the first time in years like freedom. The phone didn't ring the next day, or the one after. They had retreated, maybe licking their wounds, maybe plotting some new way to explain me away. I didn't care. I had said what needed saying. And still, I expected that old ache to follow me. The longing, the guilt. But instead, there was space. It was a Thursday morning when I found myself in the garden again, gloves on, knees in the dirt. That old hydrangea bush had needed pruning for weeks. I clipped back dead blooms one by one, my fingers steady, the morning light warm against my back. There's something holy about tending to what still grows. That's when the mail arrived. A thick manila envelope, no return address. I brought it inside and opened it on the kitchen table. And just like that, the pain returned. Not in a flood, no. It was sharper than that. Precise, like a scalpel. Inside was a letter, typed, cold, from their attorney, requesting documentation of all financial contributions I claim to have made to their household over the years, requesting itemized lists, clarifications, proof, framed, of course, in the language of clarity and healthy communication. But the intent was loud and clear. They were preparing to discredit me, to make me look petty, exaggerating, emotional, as if my memories were unreliable, as if my kindness had become a liability they now needed to manage. And there, in black and white, was the line that stopped me cold. Given the absence of written agreements regarding any of these alleged contributions, our clients reserve the right to dispute the existence of any expectation of repayment, acknowledgement, or shared ownership. Alleged. That word was a knife. I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope in front of me and my hands resting on the wood. My hands. These hands had wiped noses and signed checks and cooked every Thanksgiving meal for 25 years. These hands had held my husband's when he passed. These hands had carried all of them through their worst. And now, those hands were being erased. I stood. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked down the hallway to the guest bedroom, the one with the creaky closet and the dusty cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside that chest were the files. Everything Alan had helped me compile. Every bank statement, every signed check stub, every tax document and notarized agreement, every screenshot of every wire transfer I'd sent at a moment's notice to bail them out. of late fees, vet bills, car repairs, credit card debt, even the lease document for the condo, in my name. I gathered it all, and I made copies. Then I wrote my own letter, not typed, handwritten, in my script, the one they always said looked like cursive from another time. Dear Jason and Melissa, since you have decided to treat my memory as suspect, here is your proof. But I want you to know something. I never kept these documents because I expected repayment. I kept them because they were pieces of a life I was proud to help you build. Until you decided I wasn't part of it anymore. Until you decided that I was disposable. Enclosed, you'll find the receipts. You'll find the evidence. But what you won't find is the part I can't photocopy. The nights I worried about you in silence. The years I lived simply so you could live comfortably. The heartbreak of watching my love twisted into something you felt the need to defend yourselves against. You don't owe me money. You owe me the truth. And you owe your children an explanation when they ask one day why Grandma stopped visiting. Because one day they will ask. And I hope, for their sake, that you find an answer more honest than this letter. With what's left of my love, Mom, I mailed the letter the next morning. Certified. Signature required. 2 days later, I got a notification that it had been received. Signed for, and then nothing. No call, no message. Just the sound of silence growing thicker around my house. But here's what they didn't count on. They thought I would retreat, crumble, apologize. Instead, I gathered every bit of evidence and took it. Not to another lawyer, but to a journalist. Maggie Collins, local, quiet, smart. She had once written a piece about financial elder abuse, the kind no one talks about. The slow kind, the smiling kind, the kind dressed up in good intentions. When I told her my story, she listened. Really listened. And then she said something I'll never forget. They're counting on your shame, keeping you quiet. But your voice might be the thing that saves someone else. So I told her everything, not to ruin them, but to redeem myself. Because for years, I'd let them write the narrative. The curated photos, the smiling captions, the polished life where Mom was fine and never asked for anything. But now, I was taking back the pen. The article went live a week later. They didn't use real names, didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. And that afternoon, sitting in my kitchen, with the hydrangeas blooming outside the window and a cup of strong coffee in my hand, I watched the story spread. Shared, commented, women from everywhere chiming in. I thought I was the only one. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 5 years. They say we're difficult when we start asking to be seen. And in that moment, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt like someone had finally turned on the light. It's been 6 months since I mailed that letter. 6 months since I heard my son's voice. 6 months since I stood in the quiet aftermath of choosing myself. You'd think it would hurt more. The silence, the absence. But it doesn't. Not in the way I feared. Because in the hollow space they left behind, something else began to grow. Something mine. At first, it was small things. I bought a fresh set of towels. Not beige like Melissa would have approved. No, I chose teal. Bright and defiant. I took down the framed group photo from the hallway, the one where I'd been cropped at the edge like an afterthought, and replaced it with a watercolor I painted myself. It's not good, not really, but it's me, and that's enough. Then I signed up for a workshop at the community center, financial literacy for older women, taught by a woman named Paulette with sharp eyes and a laugh like thunder. We sit in a circle and pass around stories, numbers, names we used to sign over everything to. Husbands, sons, daughters, partners. There's power in those rooms, quiet, fierce power. And I finally understood what Maggie meant when she said they're counting on your shame, because we're trained not to talk about money, not to talk about loss, not to talk about being forgotten. But when you do, when you look another woman in the eye and say, yes, me too, the shame loses its shape. The silence cracks, and in that space, something stronger rises. One afternoon, I stayed late after class. Paulette asked if I'd be willing to co-teach a session in the fall. You've got a way of telling the truth, she said, the kind that makes people want to listen. I said yes, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, out of pride, because I have lived a long life, and I'm still here. Last week I received a letter, real mail, not an email, not a text. The envelope had no return address, but the handwriting, I knew it immediately. Jason, inside a single page. Mom, I read the article. I know it was about us. I don't blame you. I just didn't think it would hurt this much to be on the other side of the silence. Melissa and I, we've separated. It wasn't just about you, it was a lot of things. Henry asks about you. If you're willing, I'd like to bring him by. No expectations, no performance, just two people who miss you. I hope you'll say yes. Love, Jason. I read it 3 times, and then I set it down. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I did. And I wanted the words to come from a place of peace, not hurt. Later that evening, I wrote back. Dear Jason, I've always said yes. You just didn't hear me before. Bring him, but not for me. For Henry. So he can know the kind of love that doesn't vanish when it's inconvenient. Love, Mom. They came yesterday. Jason looked older, softer, as if the armor had finally cracked. But it was Henry who broke me open. He ran up the path, arms wide, shouting, Grandma! He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't care why I hadn't come around. He just jumped into my arms like love had never been interrupted. That's the thing about children. They still believe doors open when you knock. We baked cookies. Real ones this time, not store-bought. He cracked the eggs with both hands and got shells in the bowl. I didn't correct him. I just smiled. Jason washed the dishes afterward. Quiet, careful. He glanced at the pile of mail on my counter and said, You seem different. I wiped my hands and said, I am. He nodded. Then after a beat, he whispered, I'm sorry. And I believed him. Not because the words were perfect, but because this time, he looked me in the eye. That night after they left, I stood on my porch in the cold watching the sky grow dark. There's something about winter dusk. It feels like forgiveness. Slow, blue, unfinished. I thought about the flight I took to see him. The cold voice through the intercom, the way I left with a tin of cookies and a hole in my chest, and I thought about this moment. Not a grand reunion, not a resolution tied with a bow, just a beginning. Earned, not owed. And I realized something. Dignity isn't given. It's reclaimed. Sometimes it takes distance. Sometimes it takes a lawyer. Sometimes it takes a broken heart, but always it takes courage. So if you're reading this, I know and someone has pushed you into silence, into smallness, into the corner of your own story, I want to tell you something I learned too late. You do not need to be invited to matter. You are not a burden. You are not a favor. You are not invisible. You are the reason someone once learned the word home. And if they can't see that, then, my dear, you pack your cookies, you buy your ticket, and you fly toward yourself. Because the door you really need to knock on is your own. And this time, when it opens, I hope you walk in proud. Head high. Loved by you. That's all we ever needed. That's all we ever were missing.